stop for a moment. Don't move on to the next sentence. Just feel. There's something within you that was already here before you even began to read. Something that observes your thoughts as they are born, that perceives your fears before you name them, that silently records every choice you make, including choices to retreat. This presence makes no noise, doesn't demand attention, doesn't appear in the mirror, yet it knows you better than anyone, and perhaps that's precisely what's most frightening. You can pretend not to notice. You can distract yourself. Fill your day with tasks, noises. But when night falls and the silence settles on your chest, it returns, like a gaze behind a gaze, as if someone were living inside you, waiting for the right moment to speak. Who is this part that never sleeps? Who is this observer who is not confused with your name, nor with your profession, nor with the character you present to the world? Carl Gustav Jung spent his entire life trying to answer this question. For him, the human being was not merely a body walking through matter, nor simply a collection of memories. It was a profound field of psychic energy, an inner landscape full of symbols, wounds, and dormant potentials. And at the center of this landscape, there existed something greater than the ego, an ancient, silent, almost sacred core, an inner intelligence that he called the self. But before reaching that center, Jung said, every traveler must cross a dark territory. Perhaps you've felt this without being able to explain it. That decisive moment when everything seems aligned for you to move forward. An opportunity arises, an invitation, a change. Your heart races and a clear voice whispers, it's now. And in the same second, another force pulls you back. A weight in your stomach, a fear that makes no sense, a strange feeling, as if the past were grabbing your waist and saying, don't go. How many times have you given up at this exact point? How many times have you called that prudence, maturity, common sense? What if it were none of that? What if it was just a forgotten part of your own psyche, trying to keep you small? Jung observed that most people live as if hypnotized. They repeat routines, roles, and expectations inherited from family and culture. They become acceptable versions of themselves, versions that please, that fit in, that don't bother anyone. And little by little, they drift away from who they really are. It's drifting away so slow that it hardly hurts. It only leaves a void that's hard to explain. You're feeling that life happens, but you're not fully present in it. Have you ever noticed this? Have you ever felt that there's something bigger wanting to be born within you, but it never finds the space? It's as if your true identity is locked behind an inner door that you avoid opening. For Jung, this conflict is not a mistake. It is a calling of the soul towards individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Not what is expected of you, not what you have been taught, but what pulsates within you as destiny. But every calling requires courage, because contrary to what we imagine, the journey inward does not begin with light. It begins with shadow. And here comes the first shock. What you avoid looking at may be exactly what contains your strength. Think about it calmly. What if your fear wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of repressed potential? What if this restlessness you feel wasn't a flaw, but accumulated energy demanding movement? Jung saw the psyche as an electric current. Everything that is blocked creates tension. Everything that is denied returns as a symptom. Anxiety, self-sabotage, unexplained fatigue, postponed decisions. Perhaps these aren't personal failings. Perhaps they are messages. Messages from a part of you that's tired of being ignored. There's something almost mystical about this idea, yet profoundly human at the same time, as if each person carries a secret map within their chest. A map that points not outward, but inward. But this map doesn't reveal itself to those who run. It only appears to those who have the courage to stop and listen. And that's exactly what you're doing right now, not by chance. It's never by chance that someone is interested in these questions. Jung believed that the unconscious guides us with subtle signs, as if life itself orchestrated encounters, texts, conversations, and the right moments, as if something greater were saying, it's time to wake up. Perhaps this is your moment. Perhaps the restlessness that brought you here is the first step on a journey. But there is a condition. You can't continue being just the comfortable character you've learned to play. At some point, you'll have to face what's been hidden, what's been repressed, what you pretended not to feel. And this stage isn't easy. It stirs up memories, beliefs, and the image you have of yourself. The question is simple, but disturbing. Do you really want to find out who you are? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And Jung warned, self-knowledge is not a walk in the park. It is an initiation. Deep down, you already know it. You feel in your body that something is about to change. As if you were standing in front of a dark corridor full of closed doors. The air is thick. The silence is profound. And at the very end, there is a tiny sliver of light. You still don't know what's behind those doors. But I sense that inside lies the part of you that has been forgotten. And it is precisely towards that first door that we will walk now. Have you ever noticed how certain reactions arise too quickly, almost automatically, as if someone pressed a button inside you before your reason could even weigh in? A sudden irritation over something small, an envy you swear you don't feel, a desire to give up just when everything starts to go right. It's as if an underground force is pulling your strings. Without asking permission, you try to explain, invent justifications, blame tiredness, the circumstances. But deep down, you know there's something older there, something that wasn't born today. This is where Jung leads us into delicate, almost forbidden territory. He said that the human mind is like a house too big to be illuminated by a single lamp. The ego, that identity you call I, occupies only a few rooms. The rest remains in the shadows. And the curious thing is that you spend your whole life believing that only what is lit is yours. But what about what was left in the dark? Imagine a simple scene. You're in a meeting or chatting with friends, and someone makes a banal comment. Nothing serious. Even so, something inside you tenses. Your body stiffens. You feel the urge to lash out or to shut up completely. Later at home, you think, why did I react like that? It wasn't that big of a deal. This question echoes like an enigma. Who reacted there? Was it really you? Jung would say that at that moment, a repressed part took control for a few seconds. A part you don't know well. A part that was kept hidden back then, when you were still a child. The shadow rises early, very early. When you were little, you quickly learned that love had conditions. Certain behaviors earned smiles and hugs. Others generated silence, criticism, or rejection. So you did what any child would do. You adapted to survive. You hid your tears to appear strong. You swallowed your anger to be good. You stifled your brilliance so as not to bother anyone. Every time something about you was considered inappropriate, you pushed it inside. Not because I wanted to, because he needed to be accepted. But nothing that is pushed inside disappears. It is kept safe, like objects piled up in a basement. Jung called this basement the shadow, not as a poetic metaphor, but as a real structure of the psyche, a living repository of everything you've denied yourself. Not just flaws, also qualities, desires, potential, entire versions of yourself that were never allowed to exist. Think of that person who has always been the one responsible for the family, the one who solves everything, who never fails, who carries the weight of others. Everyone praises them. Seems like a virtue. But hidden away, there's an exhausted child who wants to make mistakes, wants to be cared for. This fragility was forbidden. It was pushed into the shadows. And one day, it takes its toll. In the form of anxiety, illness, collapse, or perhaps the opposite, the person who learned that they needed to be tough to survive. That vulnerability was weakness. They built a perfect armor, but deep down they buried their sensitivity, their tenderness, their ability to ask for help. When life hurts them, they collapse alone, without knowing why. It's not a lack of strength, it's an excess of denied parts of themselves. Perhaps you recognize some of this in yourself. Perhaps there are talents you never dared to explore because you were told that has no future. Perhaps there's a courage you hid so as not to be called arrogant. Perhaps there's an ambition you suppressed for fear of seeming selfish. Where did it all go? To the same place. Always going to the same place. Shadows aren't just the ugly part of you. Sometimes they're exactly what's brightest about you. This is the unexpected turn that Jung proposed, and which many people resist accepting. The problem isn't just repressed hatred, it's repressed love. It's not just aggression, it's stifled creative potential. It's not just weakness, it's the power you've never used. And what is repressed does not remain quiet. He manifests himself in disguise. You criticize in others exactly what you don't accept in yourself. You feel instant antipathy towards people who express something you've forbidden in yourself. You judge those who shine too brightly, those who take a stand, prosper. Without realizing it, you're reacting to a mirror. How many times have you said, "I would never be like that," with exaggerated intensity? Perhaps his own shadow was there asking for recognition. Jung observed that the psyche seeks balance all the time. What is denied returns as a symptom, as a strange dream, as sabotage, as a repetition of patterns. Life begins to seem like a circular labyrinth. You change cities, change jobs, change partners, but the conflicts have the same face, as if something inside you were recreating the same scenario, and in a way it is, because a shadow wants to be seen. She doesn't want to destroy you, she wants integration, but as long as it remains unconscious, it acts as an autonomous force, almost like a stranger living in your own house. Perhaps that's why sometimes you feel like you don't recognize yourself, that you do things you promised you'd never do, that you abandon dreams you swore to protect. It's not a lack of character, it's fragmentation. You are not whole, and no one can live a full life by being only half of themselves. The question now changes tone. It's no longer "what's wrong with me?" but "what did I bury in order to be accepted?" This question is frightening, because when you dig, you might find old anger, forgotten pains, painful memories, but you might also find something even more disturbing. Own greatness kept hidden like contraband. What if the part you fear looking at the most is precisely the part that holds your strength? That's the case, ignoring it isn't protection, it's self-sabotage. Jung knew this. That's why he insisted no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming aware of their own darkness. But there's one detail that almost no one notices. When you start looking into that inner basement, something begins to stir, as if the whole house were alive. And deep within that silence, you sense that the next door that will open is not merely symbolic. It will change the way you see yourself. There's a silent moment when the sabotage begins, and almost no one notices. It's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It doesn't shout orders in your head. It seeps in like fog. You wake up with a clear plan, a vivid idea, a decision made the night before. Something inside you is excited, ready to move forward. But throughout the day, small distractions arise. A strange tiredness, an urgent task that appears out of nowhere, a doubt that didn't exist before. When you realize it, the momentum has died. The step hasn't been taken, and you call it coincidence. However, Jung would never believe in coincidence when it comes to the psyche. For him, what seems like chance is often an internal movement, organizing external reality. The unconscious doesn't just react to the world. It shapes like an invisible magnet. It selects experiences that confirm old patterns. If you believe within yourself that you are incapable, the world will begin to provide proof. If there is a fear of growing up, life will be filled with perfectly convincing obstacles, and you believe the problem lies outside. The shadow operates like this. It doesn't directly stop you. It convinces you. It whispers reasonable arguments. It's better to wait a little longer. It's not the right time yet. You don't want to get frustrated again, do you? It seems like care. It seems like maturity. It seems like logic. But it's a disguised restraint. It's the wounded child trying to prevent the adult from crossing unknown territories, and without realizing it, you hand the steering wheel to it. Have you ever noticed how the most important decisions in your life are almost always postponed, as if there were an internal force specialized in pushing your dreams to tomorrow? Pay close attention. Self-sabotage rarely takes a major failure. It prefers small, continuous delays. It's a project that never starts. The course you'll always take next month. The necessary conversation you've been avoiding for years. Life doesn't crumble all at once. It dissolves little by little. Jung said that blocked psychic energy doesn't disappear. it transforms into symptoms. Anxiety, procrastination, constant guilt. It's not laziness, it's internal conflict. One part wants to move forward, another pulls back with all its might. It's like driving with the handbrake on and blaming the car for the slowness. You accelerate, you push yourself, you try harder, you work twice as hard. Even so, something gets in the way, and that generates shame. You look at others progressing and think the problem is a lack of talent or discipline, but maybe it isn't. Maybe you're fighting against a part of yourself that believes with absolute conviction that growing is dangerous. What if that part is trying to protect you from old pains you don't even remember anymore? Jung realized that the shadow doesn't originate from evil. It originates from fear, fear of rejection, humiliation, abandonment. At some point in your history, you learned that shining came at a high price. Perhaps you were ridiculed when you stood out. Perhaps you were ignored when you expressed your emotions. Perhaps you heard that this isn't for you. The unconscious records everything. Like an overprotective guardian, it concludes, better never to risk it again. Better to remain small and safe. And this childish decision remains active decades later. The problem is that the world changes, you grow up, but the shadow doesn't update its information. It still acts as if it were 7 years old. It still tries to protect that fragile child. Only now that protection has become a prison. You feel you have potential. You feel you can do more. But there's an invisible ceiling. Every time you get close to it, something happens. An unexpected fight, a silly mistake, an inexplicable fear, and you retreat again and again. This is where many start talking about bad luck, destiny, karma. But Jung was direct. As long as you don't recognize unconscious, it will direct your life, and you will call that destiny. It's not the world conspiring against you. It's your own psyche repeating old scripts. It's as if an invisible director insists on filming the same scene with different actors. How many times have you lived through similar experiences with different people? How many promises have you made to yourself and broken in the same way? Almost at the same point, there is something even more unsettling. The shadow not only blocks what you want to do, it also influences what you desire. Yes, sometimes you want things that aren't truly yours. You choose paths that seem too safe, too predictable, too comfortable. Jung called this an inauthentic life. When the ego tries to please external expectations to avoid internal conflict, you spend years climbing a ladder, and at the top, you discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. And the feeling is devastating, not because you failed, but because you succeeded in the wrong way. This is more common than you might think. People who seem fulfilled carry a deep emptiness. Everything works on the outside. Inside, silence, as if the soul weren't participating. The shadow doesn't just want to prevent you from growing. Sometimes it leads you down lesser paths where you don't threaten your own potential. This is the most uncomfortable revelation. Perhaps your current life has been partly built on decisions made out of fear, not truth. If that's the case, what truly belongs to you? What you chose, and what your shadow chose. When you start to suspect this, something changes. A different kind of unease arises. You notice patterns where before you saw chance. You perceive automatic reactions, repeated excuses, cycles that always close at the same point. It's like turning on the light in a hallway you were avoiding crossing. And deep down, you feel that something is waiting for you there. Something that isn't comfortable but is necessary. Jung said that the shadow, when ignored, behaves like an enemy. When faced, it becomes an ally. But this encounter requires real courage. Not the courage to confront the world, but the courage to look inward without masks. To admit that some of your limitations were built by yourself. To recognize that the jailer lives in the same house as the prisoner. And perhaps the most important question isn't, how do I stop? But another, much more direct one. Who within me is so afraid of my own? Because if that question is answered honestly, something unpredictable happens. The sabotage loses its mystery. And when the mystery dissolves, control begins to return to your hands. But that's just the beginning. What comes next is even more challenging. There's a revelation that often unsettles even the most rational people when they encounter Jung's depth psychology. It's not a comfortable idea, nor is it motivating in the common sense. On the contrary, when you truly understand it, you feel a slight dizziness, as if the psychological ground were shifting beneath your feet. Most of us aren't afraid of failing. We're afraid of succeeding. Seems absurd at first glance. It sounds like a poorly worded self-help phrase, but look at your own story with brutal honesty. How many times have you been close to something big, project, a change, an opportunity, and something inside you panicked? Not a logical fear, but a primal, bodily, almost animal fear. Your hands sweat, your chest tightens, your mind starts creating sophisticated excuses. Suddenly, what you desired becomes a threat. Jung saw this happen repeatedly in his patients. Talented, intelligent people full of potential who sabotaged their own growth at the very moment when life began to expand. He recorded curious cases. Artists who fell ill days before. Business people who lost crucial documents just in the week they were to close important deals. Brilliant students who forgot essential exams. It wasn't bad luck. The pattern was too precise to be a coincidence. Something within them feared their own brilliance. Imagine this calmly. For years you struggled to be seen. You want recognition, you want to prosper, you want to occupy space. But when the door finally opens, you recoil. It's as if your mind is saying, be careful. If you go through, you can't go back to the old version of yourself. Growing up is irreversible, and the ego, accustomed to the security of the small, known world, feels this as a real danger. Jung associated this fear with something very ancient, almost archetypal. In myths, heroes always hesitate before crossing the threshold. Moses before the sea, Odysseus before the unknown, Buddha before awakening. It is not weakness. It is the psyche realizing that after that passage, the old identity dies, and every symbolic death is frightening. Now think about your daily life. How many times have you shrunk yourself to fit into smaller spaces? How many times have you remained silent so as not to seem exaggerated? How many times have you pretended you didn't want something just to avoid the risk of seeming too ambitious? Small concessions that seem harmless, but which, added together, build a diminished existence. What if your greatest effort isn't to conquer the world, but to remain small enough not to threaten anyone? There is interesting data on human behavior that confirms this. Research shows that many people, upon receiving promotions or raises, experience peaks of anxiety and self-sabotage, as if success activates feelings of guilt or unworthiness. This is the so-called imposter syndrome. But Jung would go beyond the modern label. For him, it's not just about insecurity. It's a conflict between the ego and repressed parts of the psyche. If you grew up hearing that money corrupts, prospering becomes a moral threat. If you learned that standing out is dangerous, shining activates a fear of rejection. The shadow guards these beliefs as sacred laws. Then something strange happens. You start creating problems where none existed. Unnecessary arguments, silly mistakes, unexplainable delays, as if unconsciously you needed to prove to yourself that you don't deserve to move forward. It's an invisible loyalty to the past, a loyalty to the child who learned that security meant not drawing attention to themselves. But here comes an unexpected twist. The shadow fears not only its flaws, it fears its power. This changes everything, because it means that buried along with your fears lies a gigantic force, an energy you've never used. Jung believed that the shadow is a reservoir of psychic vitality. Everything you repress transforms into accumulated power. It's like dammed water. The more you block it, the greater the pressure. And this pressure manifests as anxiety, restless feeling of emptiness. It's not a lack of ability. It's an excess of energy without direction. Perhaps that's why you sometimes feel you could do so much, more than you do, as if there were a more intense, more vibrant, more authentic version of you trying to be born. And at the same time, an enormous fear of unleashing that version, because it wouldn't be well behaved. It wouldn't be small. It would speak truths, set boundaries, make courageous decisions. It would change your entire life. Would you be willing to lose some relationships to gain authenticity? Would you be ready to disappoint old expectations? To abandon roles that guaranteed approval but cost you your soul? This is where many people back down. Not because they don't want to grow, but because growth requires a break from it. Jung called this psychological sacrifice. Every transformation requires something old to die. belief, an identity, a history, and the ego resists with all its might because it confuses change with the threat of extinction. But there's something even more unsettling. The more you avoid this confrontation, the tighter life becomes. Situations repeat themselves. Discomforts increase, as if reality itself insists on pushing you out of the nest. Jung spoke of synchronicity, seemingly random events that appear to conspire to awaken consciousness. Losses, unexpected encounters, sudden crises. Sometimes the entire universe seems to say you can no longer continue living half a life, and perhaps you've felt this recently. A deep weariness of pretending, a strange urge to change everything, a feeling that the old version of yourself is too tight, like clothes that no longer fit. This isn't failure, it's growth trying to happen. The remaining question is simple and direct. If the fear you feel is not a sign of inadequacy, but a sign of repressed greatness, what would you do differently from now on? Because ultimately, the journey isn't optional. You can postpone it, distract yourself, rationalize it, but the internal pressure keeps mounting until the day comes when staying the same hurts more than changing. And when that day arrives, something inside you understands that there's no turning back. But crossing that threshold doesn't mean fighting the shadow. It means something more radical. It means learning to walk alongside it. And that's precisely where the journey becomes deeper than you imagine. There comes a point in the journey where understanding is no longer enough. You can read books, watch videos, jot down profound phrases, repeat Jungian concepts like sophisticated mantras. Nothing truly changes. Yet, life remains the same conflicts, the same delays, the same broken promises. It's like standing still on the bank of a river, studying the current, describing the water temperature, analyzing the sun's reflection, but never actually going in. Was straightforward about this. Awareness without action is intellectual illusion. Knowing the way doesn't transform anyone. Only the journey itself does. And this is where the story stops being theory and starts to hurt a little. Because looking at the shadow is uncomfortable, but acting despite it is terrifying. Imagine the simplest scene possible. You notice a clear pattern in yourself. Whenever an opportunity to grow arises, you remain silent. You avoid putting yourself out there. You say, "I'll see later." This time, however, you decide to do things differently. Nothing grand. Just speak up. Just take a stand. Just say, "I want to." It seems small, but the moment you decide to act, your body reacts as if it were facing an abyss. The heart races. The throat tightens. The mind creates 1,000 arguments to give up. It is at that exact second that the shadow screams the loudest. She doesn't want dialogue. She wants control. Jung described this moment as a direct confrontation with the unconscious. The psyche tries to maintain the old balance. Any change is interpreted as a threat, so it triggers fear, guilt, tiredness, distraction. All at the same time. It's not weakness on your part. It's real internal resistance, as if two opposing forces were vying for control of your destiny. And that's where a lot of people give up, because it seems like a sign that it wasn't meant to be. But it's exactly the opposite. If fear has surfaced so strongly, it's because you're touching on something essential. Have you ever noticed that the decisions that have most transformed your life were always the most uncomfortable at the beginning? That difficult conversation you'd been avoiding for years. The change that seemed crazy. The no you finally said. Before each major turning point, there was internal chaos, as if something was dying so that something else could be born. Jung called this the symbolic death of the old ego. Without this death, there is no psychological rebirth, just repetition. And repetition is the true silent hell. Perhaps you know someone who has spent decades complaining about the same things. Same problems, same stories, same culprits. Nothing changes. Not because life doesn't offer opportunities, but because the person never gets past the initial discomfort. They prefer known suffering to the risk of something new. They prefer predictable pain to uncertain growth. How many times have you done the same thing without realizing it? How many opportunities have you dismissed as not the right time when it was actually pure fear? Here comes the most unexpected turning point in the process. The shadow doesn't dissolve when you understand it. It only loses power when you act despite it. It's like a muscle that weakens when it's no longer used. Every small conscious action reorganizes your psychic energy. Every authentic choice sends a message to the unconscious. I am no longer that helpless child, and slowly something realigns itself within you. But don't think it will be magical or immediate. On the contrary, in the beginning it seems even worse. When you start to take a stand, some people distance themselves. When you decide to grow, old environments become uncomfortable. When you choose authenticity, masks fall. There are losses. There are silences. There are days when you question whether you're doing the right thing. This is the test. Because embracing the shadow isn't about becoming more agreeable to the world. It's about becoming more true to yourself, and the truth rarely pleases everyone. Jung warned that individuation is lonely at times, not because you need to isolate yourself, but because no one can walk through that door for you. It's an intimate decision. No one feels your fear. No one carries your story. Only you can choose to act when everything inside screams to retreat. Perhaps that's why so many people stop halfway. It's more comfortable to study one's own psychology than to transform it. It's safer to talk about courage than to practice it. The ego loves theories. The soul demands movement, and movement generates tension. But there's something curious that almost no one talks about. After you overcome your first great fear, something changes permanently. The subsequent fear diminishes. Then it decreases even more, until you realize something surprising. The shadow wasn't trying to destroy you. It was storing energy. Every step you take releases a little of that force. You begin to feel more alive, more present, more grounded, as if you were reclaiming parts of yourself that had been dormant for years. His voice gains weight. His gaze becomes more direct. His decisions become simpler. Not because life has become easy, but why did you stop fighting against yourself? But there's one last detail, almost a final trap. When you start to truly change, the shadow tries one last strategy: emotional exhaustion, a sudden urge to give up everything, a feeling of what's the point, as if all the effort was for nothing. It's the last gasp of the old pattern trying to survive. Many people back down precisely here, when you're just a few steps away from real transformation. The question is tough, but necessary. Are you going to stop now, after having come so far? Or will you go through this final discomfort? Because what exists on the other side isn't a perfect version of you. It's something rarer, more solid, more silent. It's the feeling of being whole. And when that integration begins to happen, life stops feeling like a constant battle. It becomes direction, purpose, presence. But there is still one area where all this change will be brutally tested in a concrete way. An area of life where the shadow tends to hide more strongly than anywhere else. And almost no one suspects this. There's a very specific moment in anyone's life when everything becomes strangely silent inside. It's not euphoria, it's not fear, it's not enthusiasm. It's a dense, almost solemn silence, as if something were about to be decided without an audience, without applause, without witnesses, just you and yourself. This moment arrives after all explanations, after all excuses. It arrives when there's nowhere left to run. That's where the journey really begins. Throughout this journey, you've heard about shadow, the unconscious self-sabotage, fear of your own greatness. Perhaps you've recognized patterns, remembered scenes from your childhood, understood why you repeat certain behaviors. But now the question is simpler and more direct than any psychological concept. What are you going to do with this? Because insight without action is just mental entertainment. Jung never wanted to entertain anyone. He wanted to awaken. He said that individuation doesn't happen when you understand who you are. It happens when you live as who you are. There's a brutal difference between knowing and embodying. Knowing is comfortable. Embodying changes your entire life. Perhaps you're noticing this now. Perhaps you're feeling a slight tightness in your chest, as if something is asking for movement. It's not anxiety. It's pent-up energy. It's everything that's been repressed for years starting to knock on the door. Your old desires, your forgotten courage, your voice that you silenced so many times. All of it wants to come back. And when that energy returns, life begins to demand a certain attitude. attitude. You can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer hide behind "I'll do it someday." You can't keep blaming the past, others, or fate, because now you see the mechanism, and when you realize it, the responsibility is yours. This might be scary, but it's also liberating. For the first time, control is not out of reach. It's in your hands. Transformation doesn't begin with grand, heroic gestures. It begins in everyday life, in the small decisions that no one sees. Jung said that the sacred is hidden in simple acts, telling the truth when it would be easier to lie, setting boundaries where you've always suppressed yourself, starting that project you've been putting off for years, asking for help, ending relationships that drain your energy, taking care of your body, organizing your own life, honoring your own time. Seems too basic, but that's precisely where the shadow loses its power. Every time you act consciously, you send a message to the unconscious, "I have grown." Every time you choose authenticity over approval, something inside you aligns, and little by little, the internal war diminishes. Have you ever noticed how whole people seem calmer, even when facing problems? It's not because their lives are easy. It's because they aren't constantly fighting with themselves. The energy that was once spent on self-sabotage becomes clarity, presence, and direction. This is the integration of the shadow. It's not about turning into perfect light. It's about stopping dividing ourselves. It's accepting that you are both strength and fragility at the same time, light and darkness, fear and courage, and that all of this can coexist without conflict. When this happens, something curious emerges. You begin to feel a kind of natural magnetism. You don't need to force it so much. Decisions become more straightforward. The right people come closer. Work flows better. Money ceases to be a constant struggle. It's not magic, it's internal coherence. When you don't sabotage yourself, life moves forward. Perhaps looking back, you realize how many opportunities you missed, not because of inability, but because of fear. How many versions of yourself were kept locked away in the basement? How many times were you less than you could have been just to fit into other people's expectations? Now imagine the opposite. Imagine waking up knowing you no longer need to hide. Imagine speaking your mind without guilt. Choose paths that make sense to you. To thrive without feeling like you're betraying anyone. To be seen and still feel safe. This version is not fantasy. It already exists. It has always existed. She was covered only by layers of fear. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all is this: you never needed to become someone else. You just needed to stop running away from yourself. Take a deep breath for a moment. Think of a single concrete action you can take today. Not tomorrow, today. Something small but real. A conversation, a step, a beginning. That is your rite of passage. That is how Jung's journey ceases to be theory and becomes flesh-bone reality. The transformation doesn't happen when you finish this video. It happens with the first step you take after him. If everything you've heard here has touched you, don't let that energy dissipate. Use it. Write down what you've noticed. Share your experience. Sometimes putting it into words is already the beginning of integration. So I want to invite you in a very direct way, like this content so that more people can have access to this reflection. Comment below what resonated with you the most. You can even comment anonymously if you prefer, and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery, because this is just the beginning. Your shadow is not the end of your story. She is the portal, and the next door, you already know you need to open it.